Let's bring in Labor's member for Kingsford Smith, Matt Thistlethwaite, now joins us from the Sydney CBD. Thanks for joining us, Matt. Firstly, on the big political story of the day when it comes to the federal politics, of course, is Scott Morrison announcing that, yes, Australia will commit to the US-led coalition in the Gulf for protecting shipping through the Straits of Hormuz, one frigate and one maritime surveillance aircraft. Your acting leader and defence spokesman, Richard Marles, has supported that. It's good to see when there is a military deployment, however small and however uncontentious, I suppose, that it gets that bipartisan support.
Yeah, Labor will support this deployment, Chris. The Strait of Hormuz is a strategically important international shipping lane, particularly for international commerce. About a third of the world's LNG exports travel through that particular strait, about a quarter of the world's oil, much of that bound for petroleum here in Australia. So strategically important. Labor's always had a strong position of supporting freedom of navigation and upholding the law of the sea. And when it comes to this issue, we're with the government on this and we support the deployment.
Yeah, and it's not a big deployment, is it? I mean, you might have been worried if there was a huge commitment. I don't want to downplay it. We run a pretty good frigate, of course, but, I mean, it's not really detracting from what we might be doing back here in the region.
Yeah, and that's really important. We've also got a role to play in the Indo-Pacific region, and I've noted the Prime Minister's comments that this deployment won't detract from those activities. And as you are well aware, Australia's had a strong tradition of supporting actions such as this and ensuring that the law of the sea and international conventions are upheld where there is tension. And hopefully, through this process, that tension can be de-escalated and that shipping lane maintained as an important corridor for international commerce.
Matt, I've got to ask you about this document from the Labor Environment Action Network, their submission to Labor's election review. They say that the environment policies are fine. The 50% renewable energy target, the higher emissions reductions targets, they are all fine. It was just a problem of not being able to sell them very well.
Well, we're undergoing a process of reviewing all of our policies in the wake of the election, Chris, as you know, and we accept that we weren't able to convince the Australian public that we had a better agenda, and that was reflected in the election result. That's why we're conducting this review. Certainly welcome LEAN, the Labor Environment Activist Network, and their members putting this submission in and giving us their view. And the review committee will no doubt have a look at this and the thousands of other submissions that we're receiving and issue a report that will be available to the public for all to see. Yeah. And we as members of Parliament will consider that in due course.
Look, yeah, I don't want to be unfair because I think it's a sensible process to take your time on looking at all this stuff. But as a general principle, you can't blame the election loss just on marketing and on a biased media. There has to be surely some changes in the policy mix.
Well, look, Chris, I think there will be. There's no doubt that policies were some of the issues that were contributed to the defeat that we suffered at the election, and we'll go through the process of reviewing those policies. But the principle that Labor holds to is one of stronger action on climate change, and I note that we're not alone on that. There's reports in the media today that the British government have actually said to Australia that they want us to take stronger action on climate change because they believe that developed countries need to do more if we're going to meet those international commitments that we've signed up to. So Labor does believe in stronger action on climate change. We believe in a national energy policy that this government currently doesn't have. How we get to that over the course of the next 3 years is a matter for debate, not only within the party, but in consultation with other Australians.
OK, on the other big news story of the day, the conviction upheld against Cardinal George Pell. What are your reflections on what that means for the debate here in Australia about these child sex historic convictions, about the future of the Catholic Church, how we handle these issues?
Well, George Pell is a convicted pedophile under Australian law. I've deliberately refrained from making public statements about it in the past and on Twitter and the like because I wasn't in the courtroom and I didn't assess the evidence, and we now as Australians have to accept that evidence of that court, and we have to assume that those people that made those decisions accessed all of that evidence and did it in the correct manner according to Australian law. And it's now up to us to put the debate aside and make sure that we get on with ensuring that this never happens again in Australia, not only through the clergy, but also in wider Australian society. And, you know, credit to Julia Gillard for instituting the Royal Commission, which uncovered a lot of these activities and led to these convictions. And just finally wanted to say, Chris, that my thoughts are with the victim in this case, but not only him, but others throughout the country who have been in these terrible situations. No one should have to go through that.
Yeah, well said, Matt. I'd forgotten, we haven't mentioned today Julia Gillard. Whatever your views on George Pell, this particular case, but with this issue and getting some comfort for victims, it's that Royal Commission called by Julia Gillard when she was Royal Commission that's been so pivotal, hasn't it? Yeah,
that's certainly right. And you know, there was criticism of Julia at the time when she did that, but I think certainly in hindsight, every Australian would now agree that that was the right thing to do. It gave those poor victims the opportunity to have their say and to make sure that Australians listened to them. And they've been listened to. There have been a series of recommendations that have come out of that Royal Commission. And once again, credit to Julia for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Matt.
Cheers, mate. Good on you, Chris.